Well, welcome. My name is Aaron Stauffer. I'm the Louisville Institute Postdoctoral Fellow at the Wendland-Cook Program in Religion and Justice at Vanderbilt Divinity School. And I'm overjoyed to be able to have this chance to talk with Reverend Dr. Teresa Smallwood, who's the postdoctoral fellow at Vanderbilt Divinity School and the director of the Public Theology and Racial Justice Collaborative there. Dr. Smallwood and Teresa, I'm really happy that you're taking the time today to speak with us around this really important issue of racial capitalism and how it is that race and class come to matter in the work that you do and that the Wendland-Cook Program does, along with a number of other really important pressing issues, including gender, sex, immigration status. These issues are not neatly separated. And when we deal with people's real lives and real struggles, they're often intersecting and compounding. And so that's really what I want to be able to talk with you today. I want to take some time to really explore the intersectionality within your work and the work of the Public Theology Racial Justice Collaborative. So why don't we start there? Can you talk a little bit about how economic inequality matters to the work you do? And especially, I'm interested, perhaps with our audience, if you could relate to this question to the important works that you all have done following the 2020 March tornado, and especially in your work in the Nashville community to provide COVID-19 relief.
Sure. And let me just take the moment to say how thankful I am for the series of conversations you all are doing. You have curated some very viable material that I think will be helpful to folk as they awaken to some of the strained issues that we have in our communities. I am so thankful to have you as a colleague, Aaron. You think critically, and that is very important. As I think about public theology and this idea of racial justice, it is a call to witness outside the four walls of the church. And so my work has taken me into communities, particularly those that are marginalized, oppressed, and it goes without saying they are racialized as well. Because in this country, everything, and I do mean everything, every system is overlaid by a plantation mentality. There are the haves and the have-nots. And you cannot look at a system of government, a system of overseeing that does not have the same mentality of plantation life. And so with that comes the importance of understanding how things matter to those who are at the bottom rung. So for instance, you brought up the March 3rd tornado. I have had the privilege and the honor of being able to put a few dollars into the community as a result of the CARES Act. And also as a result of the generous work being done by some foundations, and the Henry Luce Foundation is the one I work with, that gave me the opportunity to spread a few dollars out. And I could not believe, I just could not believe the disparities that you see. We're called to bring people into wholeness, and wholeness has much more to do with how they live and how they breathe than it even has to do with the so-called soul-ish realm. And so how people live and breathe has to do with, for me, the juxtaposition of someone who says, I can't breathe. It is a statement of ontology, and it speaks to the intersecting capacity for people to know that breathing is incident to health. It's also incident to environment, right? And it's incident to how people live within their means. So for instance, in a tornado, it is not uncommon to see pipes burst. Well, if you're on the rung that says you don't own a home, but you rent a home, what I ran into over and over and over again is where, NES bill, water bill is in the name of the renter. But because there was such devastation, you had people just flocking to North Nashville ready to buy up properties. And because they were destroyed, folks didn't have a stake in being able to go back into those rental places. So if the pipe caused water to continue to come, then that meant the bill was going up. And not only was the person who owned the property being able then to just sell and make a few dollars, but here's someone who lived there with no place to go now and a great big bill. I saw water bills as much as $1,000, right? And so how are you going to go even to get another rental place when you can't even turn the water on? That is a very practical indication of how class, race, and economics intersect with one another. Because the rich got richer and the poor got poorer in that example. And it happens over and over and over again. Same thing happens with NES. You know, someone whose bill has always been $100, all of a sudden now getting $400 bills. But people who live in Green Hills have had no disparities, no changes in their rates. Who's really causing that to happen? Well, what we know is that municipalities and principalities operate about the same way. And the evil is what many racialized people find themselves having to shoulder and deal with. And it's difficult to do unless there are folk who are out there willing and ready to shed light on the systematic, because it's a racism problem if you have an ideology different from mine that says I don't belong because I'm Black. But it is a systemic problem when that happens across the board within systems that everyone has to interface with. So what I found is that unless we can do something to change the economic outlook for people and be in a posture where we understand that those kinds of atrocities must be redressed, we cannot just simply acknowledge or even repent. We must repair the breach.
I really appreciate that what you've just shared with us here, particularly this sort of distinction between both of these evils, right? Racial evils, but then also systemic evils, showing how it is that race and class compound and work together to drive and further marginalize and further oppress particular folk. And to use that example after the tornado just gives you something that's, I think, a really good example, because it's a natural disaster, something you cannot control. And yet then the system comes in and gentrification and predatory buying up takes place. And so it's just a really important way to lift people's eyes to sort of say, listen, this is not just sort of something that happens here and there. It happens, and it happens strategically, systematically, and when we are at our weakest. Mm-hmm. And that is particularly the importance of the evilness of it, which I really appreciate you calling out. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's important to me about this, is that we name this theologically. We name it as idolatry, we name it as evil, and we begin to usher the theological resources in order to conjure different economic and political imaginations of what it means to be a part of the body of Christ, to be a part of the church, speaking in Christian language, of course, here. So I want to keep on going and ask you just sort of, so I know a lot of the work that you do, particularly before the pandemic, but even now you're doing a lot of this virtually, has been going to communities to talk about this work, bringing large groups of people to Nashville for this, to have your annual conferences. I wonder how it is that you talk to people about this who aren't necessarily ready to make that systemic approach. How do you talk to them about the basic intersectionality about this work, and help them see that racial justice or racial injustice and economic inequality are so deeply related and therefore must be fought together?
Well, there is a whole lot of deconstruction that has to happen in conversation. You can't enter into the discussion lightly, but you can use examples, for instance, that I just did. And a greater example, for instance, here in this Nashville region, would be for us to look at, the difference between how racialized minorities are dealt with in criminality or in any other aspect of our lives versus how that same thing happens in white communities. And the best example I have right now is the bombing that happened on Christmas, around Christmas time. You know, had there been any intelligence whatsoever around someone making a bomb a year ago, it would have been shut down because a battering ram would have gone to the door, opened that door up and saw all of the materials and put it to rest. But that did not happen. The intelligence was ignored. And to some degree, we all know, you know, what the limits were. In the same fashion, we all know the story of the young Black woman who no longer even is in relationship with the person they're looking for. Her door gets knocked down. Her children are there. She's not even dressed completely. And the police found absolutely nothing that is of a criminal nature. And so it depends on what zip code you live in, you know, what area of the town you're in. But then the question of people's morality and people's altruism helps us really understand the dynamics of economics. I mean, essentially, as soon as we heard that a bomb went off during Christmas, I mean, almost immediately, monies were there to help repair. Now, in the tornado, monies were put there, as much as $10 or $11 million. But we're now almost a year out from that tornado, and I would venture to say 8 million of those 11 million are still sitting in somebody's bank. And people are trying right now to figure out how to become at least a home, have a home, and not be homeless. So a good bit of our capacity to think and to think solution has to do with us really calling people out and coming to some understanding that, you know, when it comes to economics, we have to be very vigilant to say, listen, there's no reason why you're sitting on money when people are still starving. People are still living under the bridge. How can you justify having collected gifts from folk all over the world and not do something to help people get housing? These are the things that, in my mind, from a very practical standpoint, help us understand how to have the conversation. So I can sit with anyone. You can be someone that Jonathan Metzl was targeting when he wrote his book, Dying of Whiteness. I was sitting in a line waiting to see a doctor the other day, and someone told me about, you know, their Trump, they had a Trump mask. That was to say, essentially, you know, the thing that bothers you doesn't bother me. You know, I will die before I give someone the right to have health insurance on my dime, on my taxpayer money. Those are the folk that I'm not necessarily called to witness to. But if the opportunity presents itself, I have something to say. And what I say is not about Black or white. It's about humanity. You'd be surprised the ways in which aha moments happen when people get a chance to be interrogated on the very thing they believe. So in part, how you enter the conversation is through a belief system analysis. You may not believe in the same Jesus I believe in, but you believe in something because you're sitting on that chair. And if you didn't have a belief system, you wouldn't have believed that chair could hold you. And so it's up to me to help you see why your capacity to believe needs to shift to a place where you can understand and know that whatever it is you believe in requires of you to care about another human being.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think one thing that strikes me from what you've said here is that it takes a lot of different people who are called to do different work to be a part of this movement here of really addressing the evils of racial capitalism. And I think that's your comment here around the person who had the Trump mask is really at least, you know, strikes to the core for me that you know, when it comes to building relationships that are founded upon solidarity against racial capitalism, building those within the white community, naturally happens and should be accountable to those who identify themselves as white. And so I think that that's particularly important here, right? It's not the idea of talking about racial capitalism or economic justice is not to negate the importance and to deny any reality of the evils of racism and the legacies of slavery that exist within this country. It is, however, strategically, I think, a way for us to think about what it means to build power in order to construct an economic and political alternative than the currently evil one that we've got right now. And the way that you do that, it seems to me, is by building relationships of deep solidarity. And that's not always easily done, nor should it always be, on the, placed at the feet of a particular group of people. Everybody has a part to play in this. And I think that that's particularly important for us to understand, where it is that one is situated within this racialized world, right? So I certainly, as a white man who comes from a small town in rural Kansas, understand that there's a big responsibility for me to begin to work within my community to build deep solidarity across racial and economic lines in order to spur those imaginations. And I think that this is, you ended here really nicely on a belief system, right? You got to do some deconstructing and belief analysis, because I think it's absolutely right, whether it's false ideology or naivete, right? Individuals engage in this world based on faith claims, whether it's economic faith claims that the dollar is almighty, that individuals can pull themselves up by the bootstraps or not, or whether it's sort of faith claims that I would find more amenable to my own stance here too. But this is a long way of me of saying that bad theology matters. And so I'm curious for you here, how do you go about constructing a version of theology that addresses the evils of racial capitalism and is truly liberative? What are the sources that you draw on, whether it's personal experience, ancestors, mentors? Talk to me about the sources of your theology that you find to be truly liberative.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I clearly I am a Christian. I profess Christianity, and so I do hold the scriptures, close to my heart, and I look for those passages that help me understand my capability as one who is an inheritor, right? And I view sacred scripture, the sacred text, as a strong source, but it's not my only source. And so I look to others who I believe are anointed, who are of that same spirit. Poetry for me is huge, and it didn't just come out of the Psalms. So there are people like Audre Lorde who informs. There are so many folks I could name, but she most definitely informs my understanding and attitude around a theological perception that my difference matters, but my difference is not something that diminishes my capacity to show up. In fact, I embrace my difference as a value add. James Baldwin has absolutely sacred text that helps to situate my feelings around my oneness with God and my capacity to be seen, to understand those theological gifts that bring the balance. The fire next time. It is for me a way to understand and know, and it's not just an eschatological concept. It is a concept of there is balance in this thing. But I would say more than anything, Aaron, it is the ability for me to recognize the very gifting of nature. Nature, watching birds, looking at the change of seasons, understanding the greatness of creativity, and appreciating that there is a way for the ecosystem of life to flow differently than what we have crafted. There's something about my capacity to engage, to be a part of the mosaic that is the image of God, and to contribute in such a way that it doesn't take away from you, but it enhances who we all are. You know, it is not the Cartesian formula, right? I think, therefore I am. It is the Ubuntu formula. I am because we are. And those are the ways in which my theological grounding spans the gambit. It is not just the scriptures. It is the ability to appreciate creativity, to appreciate imagination, and to think. Because it's that allows me to see a way forward that does not have to have cages to put people in to punish them. I can imagine a world without any kind of carceral system. I can imagine a world where everybody has a decent house to live in. I can imagine a world where folks get a living wage, that we're not worried about whether or not you got enough food on your table. That is not the issue, you know? And we can make an issue out of some other things, right? Yeah, so that's how that is my constructive theological approach to life.
I love that. And I think that what's so wonderful about the mosaic, the Ubuntu approach that you've got here is just, I think it's the urgency that I feel behind that I resonate with that. It's the fact that oftentimes when people think about difference, they think about it in a way that somehow negates someone else's difference, right? That it somehow cannot, they can't imagine that it might enrich or enhance the conversation in a way that doesn't negate anybody else's work. Now, politically and economically, this is extremely important to me, because what it means is that when you go about building power, is that you need everyone at the table, right? You've got to talk about the fact that we've got all working people who this system of racialized capitalism, the economic system deploying race in a way that divides us and has consistently done that over and over and over again, right? If your example of the March 3rd tornado isn't anything, it's an example of how it is that the powerful are using these things quickly in order to keep everyone down. But just the beauty and the majesty that can come from that sort of political and economic work, I think is really important, right? Like this is also something that Angela Davis said a few years ago when she was here at Vanderbilt. She said, we have to create a movement that people can fall in love with. And I think that's what you're talking about. That's what strikes me, is this fact that this is not just, this is fighting, this is hard work, but this is about beauty, about joy, about, being sort of the reality that you're participating in something that's larger. The majesty of creation, I think, is really striking what you said. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. This is really wonderful. And I'm hopeful and continuing to look forward the work that we've got promised to do together.
Absolutely. Right. Thank you so much. And just know that I'm here as a resource and a support.